It's great being back here in Karlsruhe. I don't think I have been in Karlsruhe for about 12 years. I was part of an EU project, and I came here as a project expert working with Professor Goss at the university. So I used to have a lot of friends here, but they've all moved away. But it's nice to remember the city. So I thought I would end the event here with a kind of a stirring talk, an inspirational talk that's a little bit of a downer. And of course, we like to end on an up note. And I will try to turn this into an up note at the end. But it's easy to get into a happy bubble after a conference like this. And I will talk about the role that conferences have in the dehumanization of Agile and objects. So a lot of this will be about history. My wife, who is here, hates it when I talk about history because, you know, I look like a reminiscing old man or something. But, you know, history, great German philosopher Hegel said that history teaches us that man learns nothing from history. So I want to give ourselves the opportunity to learn something here. So a lot of terms have been floating around these past 2 days as I've listened to talk. Scrum, Lean, Object. I should have put up that wonderful picture from Princess Bride. You've all seen it on the web. You keep using that word. I'm not really sure you know what it means. So I have a little family tree here to kind of put some of these terms in context. The first one here is the Toyota Production System, or TPS, which goes back to about 1945 or 1950, depending on how you count. And it is more or less directly where Jeff Sutherland got Scrum. It came through a paper by Takeuchi and Nonaka called the New Product Development Game, and the first Scrum was in 1993. Lean is something completely different. Lean is kind of this American misunderstanding of the Toyota production system that was based on a lot of misinformation that Toyota gave them to try to make sure that the Americans would not get ahead of the Japanese. How many of you know 5 whys? What's the purpose of 5 whys? Root cause. Does a complex adaptive system have a root cause? Of course not. But the Japanese got everyone in America to believe that there's a root cause beneath complex problems. This is stupid. We're going to stop doing stupid things. All right, so Lean is something separate, and Jeff Sutherland makes that point repeatedly. And then, you know, extreme programming came from Scrum, except they got it all wrong. And then on this branch, object-oriented programming goes back to 1967, gets named and really defined in 1972, and starts having a culture around it in 1980. The patterns culture grew out of that. I'll say a little about patterns here. And a lot of the Agile movement, in fact, came out of patterns with a lot of influence from Scrum and a little bit from XP. What's notable about this, Agile came from Scrum. Scrum didn't come from Agile. And Agile is kind of a cream skimming of Scrum that throws away all the good parts that come from here. Now, I'm going to be focusing a lot on Agile and OO in this talk. But I want to make it clear that there's something much deeper behind this that I'll come back to in the end that's important to be attentive to. And I want to run this so I can see my own notes. Let's see if this works. You can see my notes. This is inevitable in going in front of an audience, is that when you try to run things the first time, they don't work. So let me just quickly go to displays, arrangement, mirror, no. Put this over here. OK, let's try this. Does this work? Yes, all right. So there's a lot earlier roots to all of this. Now, in fact, object orientation and Agile are the same thing. They both are about anthropomorphism. They're both about interacting agents. In Agile, we talk about people interacting. They're both about emergent behavior, things that cannot be planned and only forecast, in the same sense that we can only forecast the weather. They are both about doing things incrementally. Now, there have been a number of misunderstandings of this that people have run with. One of them is extreme programming. And I was working with Kent on the patterns, and he decided he couldn't make any consulting money from the patterns. So he wrote to Jeff Sutherland and said, hey, you know, I've been working on some patterns. Can you send me that paper from Harvard Business Review? I've been working on some patterns that I want to steal everything I can get. So this is a mail he sent to Jeff, and the rest is history. Of course, I invented extreme programming. Did you know that? So this is Kent's biography from a paper he gave. And following work by Jim Coplien and Ward Cunningham, he invented extreme programming. I didn't know that. And early on, this whole Agile thing was about people. How many of you have not seen the Agile manifesto before? Anyone here has not seen this? Oh, the cameraman. That's OK. I mean, when I teach Scrum courses, I'm a certified Scrum trainer. I go out there and I ask my classes, and on the average, it's about half of the people in the class who have never seen this. Kind of interesting. And of course, this doesn't tell me what to do. It's just a way of assessing yourself about where you are on these spectra. But the thing I really want to focus on here is it's about individuals and interactions. Individuals? You are all individuals. Let's try that again, louder. You are all individuals. Not me. Not me, yes, right. Someone has seen the movie. Isn't it about teams? What's this individual stuff? I never quite understood that. So early on, it was about individuals. And if we look at the lean lineage that comes through Honda and Toyota in Japan, this is a slide by Nonaka sensei. So Nonaka is kind of the godfather of Scrum. And so it was his paper that Jeff Sutherland got a lot of the ideas from. And this is Nonaka sensei's history of Scrum. It started with his paper, The New Product Development Game, in 1986. And this is where the term Scrum is first used. You know where it comes from? It comes from overlapping work. And he could see this overlapping work as like sashimi on a plate, overlapping pieces of sashimi. And he said, what's the equivalent, the human equivalent of sashimi? Please stand up. Should it? Yeah, please stand up. So what's the human equivalent of sashimi? So we're going to overlap here. What is this?
I don't eat sushi.
Love.
Love. This is a scrum from rugby. That's where the term scrum comes from. It's people, everyone doing everything all the time. And then he made his Seki model, which is brilliant. And then we did the organizational patterns in 1993. Now remember, this was Nonaka sensei's slide. And then Jeff Sutherland ran his first sprint. In fact, it was about the same time. It was, in fact, in 1993 at the Easel Corporation. And then he incorporated some of my ideas in 1994. The first Scrum book is 7 years later by Ken, the Agile Manifesto in the same year. So Agile is quite late after Scrum. And now, more recently, he has gotten together with Hiranabe-san in Japan, and they have written a Scrum book called Collaborative Software Development. It's only in Japanese. And it brings together these ideas from a lot of the history. So this is more from the TPS lineage coming into Scrum. But the point that I want to start with is that in their origins, both of these, they were very idealistic and had a lot of the same foundations. That they were about people. So in the Agile Manifesto, we see individuals and interactions. And in object orientation, we see in the early days, back in the 1980s, anthropomorphic design, user-centric design, CRC cards. How many of you know what CRC cards are? Where you use index cards, and you are an object, and you will write there on what your responsibilities are. We've lost that, haven't we? That's kind of interesting. Ongoing repair. Agile is about responding to change, object orientation, programming by difference, new forms of modularity. Agile, outwardly focused, customer collaboration. And object orientation was originally about engaging end users through the operational models they held in their head. So what an object is a computer representation of a human operational model. That's what it is. Now, since then, there have been programming language wars and a lot of misunderstandings, and we've ended up doing class-oriented programming instead. And it seems like no one understands object-oriented programming anymore. And lastly, the focus on quality, whatever that means. To the Agile people, it's working software. The green bar comes up. Wow. And in object orientation, it's about test-driven development, unit testing, automated testing. Ooh, how many of you do automated testing? How waterfall. Here's a child out in the grass, and she's playing with her computer, working on a tool that's connected to the library. When do you think this picture was taken? 80? I think it's 1976. 1976. That's an iPad, for crying out loud. You see the keyboard on the screen here? And Alan Kay had this dream of something called the Dynabook, which was something he would use to educate children, that they would program to connect with the world around them and extend their mind into the world around them. We want the child to program the computer, not the computer to program the child. B.F. Skinner at this time was working on education software where you would train a child to remember certain things. The same way you train a pigeon to peck keys on a typewriter to get a grain of corn, or that you train a rat to go through a maze. And Alan Kay was following a psychologist named Piaget and said a child is not a scaled-up pigeon or rat. But in their head, they have these things called operational models. And what we want to do is to get a model of their surrounding environment to deal with it. We want to hook into these modes of thought in order to influence him rather than just trying to replace his model with one of our own. Now, these models are algorithms for solving problems. They're operational models. And this is where object orientation was born in the early to mid 1970s. And there's a very early paper about this that's floating around on the web. I don't think this was ever published. But I just pulled a quote out of this, that Piaget's and others' work on the bases and forms of children's thought is a fairly convincing argument for believing that computers are an almost ideal medium for the expression of a child's epistemology. What is an operational model if not an algorithm, a procedure for accomplishing a goal? Object orientation was initially about problem-solving algorithms. So those who think it's about classes and that we have to reintroduce algorithms and processes on these have gotten stuck in the mode of class-oriented programming and haven't gone back far enough to understand that this is what object-oriented programming was about almost 50 years ago. So we forget so easily. And we have very poor memory as a culture. So it's about what Kay called genetic epistemology. Knowledge, particularly in the young child, is retained as a series of operational models, each of which is somewhat ad hoc and need not be logically consistent with the others. They're essentially algorithms and strategies. It's much later in development the child finds out about logic, and even then, only through extra-logical strategies. So these are the foundations of OO. It's about getting into the human mind, and now we're going to extend the human mind into the computer so that the computer serves as an extension of the human mind. So this has been the vision of all of these original people working on OO. And in order to interact with the computer, it's very hard for humans to interact directly with the technology, because there's a technology mismatch here. I can't get inside and touch the objects. It's like, in order to communicate with you, I'd like to be able to go in and directly manipulate the neurons, but it'd be really messy. So I worked through this interface. And so we have an interface that allows the individuals to interact with their computers seamlessly. And it's about the individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I don't want them going through a process, through a front end that goes to a server and so forth. It's a seamless, direct manipulation of that object. And I do this through a tool. So each one of the child has a mental model, or you have a mental model on how you're going to transfer money between accounts. And you carry this mental model with you. I want that model also to live in the machine so that machine can do this for me. So model, mental model, model view controller. Model view controller is about extending the mental model of human beings into the computer and allowing this interface to facilitate the interaction between the person and the machine. What's the purpose of the controller? I heard that. That's another one of the terms I heard here. Someone was telling me about the controller, and we don't want fat controllers. What's the purpose of the controller? Everyone says it's going to take the input from the keyboard and the mouse. No, that's not the purpose of the controller. The input from the keyboard and the mouse comes to the tool. It can come to the view. It can come to controller. There's nothing in MVC that says it goes to the controller. The purpose of the controller is to create and coordinate views. And again, history got this all wrong. Smalltalk 80 got it all wrong, because they started to not be concerned about the human being, but concerned about the programmer and the machine. So the controller creates all kinds of views. I can have a pie chart view. I can have a bar graph view. And the input can come to the controller, but it can as well come to the view. And it's dispatched to the view in the model. So the early view of object orientation was about extending the human being and extending human mental models into the machine. Now, since then, we've, I think, really gone wrong. We've lost these foundations. And when I come to a conference like this and I hear the talks and I look for these things, I can't find them. And so it's evidence that we have lost these foundations, these very dear human foundations to serve humanity. Most programmers program in classes. Who here has written an object? Who here has programmed an object in the past month? What language are you programming in? Java. You cannot do. There's one language in which it is impossible to do object-oriented programming, and that's Java. You can do it in C++ with enough faking out, but it's impossible to do it in Java. It's the only language in which you can't do it. How many JavaScript programmers here? Oh. Do you write objects? Yeah. There's an object-oriented programming language. But it is. I mean, you're programming objects. And, you know, I'll say some more about JavaScript later. Classes are static. How many of you sell classes to your customers? If you sell classes and you claim, anyone selling classes? And you're using Scrum?
What do you mean selling classes? We're selling software.
You want to buy my software? You want to buy my classes? It's like watches, right? No, we don't sell classes. We sell use cases. That's what we sell. And so that's where the focus should be. Who wanted me to talk about DCI? This is my DCI part. OK. because polymorphism, because we program in classes, if we have a use case and we line these classes up and their objects are going to call each other, each call is polymorphic. They're hypergalactic go-tos. We have no hope of understanding our code. And if we can't understand it, it probably isn't right. So we added testing. What a lot of waste. And then we did that wrong, because all we're testing are the classes. We're doing unit testing in TDD. So there was this wonderful talk I went to Undone that says, no, I want system testing, integration testing, things at this level. Unit testing is mainly waste and, in fact, probably will decrease your quality. Read my white papers on the web. No, I mean, I can prove this. And if you start gathering data, you'll be very, very scared. The GUI comes later, or it's separated in a client-server architecture. So not only do programmers not understand the code, but that poor child whose mental model we're putting in the code can't understand the code either. And it's supposed to be their mental model, not one we substitute, as Kay said. And the use cases aren't designed so the users can't understand them from the user interface either. And the coders can't understand them for the code. So, I mean, object orientation has lost its roots. There's very little reasoning and few methods that focus on what Kay called networks of cooperating objects. We're all focusing on the classes. The only pictures I saw today were pictures of inheritance hierarchies. We all love our inheritance hierarchies, because that's something new. And it's kind of magic when you get inclusion polymorphism. So we're all kind of enamored with inheritance and subtyping. But that isn't what it was about. I think the original K paper, the one I showed you, uses the term classes once. It's not about classes. It's about objects. Microservices. Ooh, another buzzword. Object-oriented programming for the next decade. Right? Now, it could be kind of right, except everyone's looking at the wrong end. It's focusing on independence rather than interdependence of services. And everyone is trying to raise managers' hopes, because after all, managers have the money, and they will hire you as a consultant, that they're independent, and you don't have to worry about coordinating your teams, that each team can work independently on their independent microservices, and all will be well. We've been here 40 years ago with object orientation, and we know it doesn't work. But the same bad ideas keep coming up again and again and again, because we don't learn. Focus on unit testing and object integrity has replaced any notion of operational models and the human focus. So our minds are in the gutter. We're all focused on these classes. We're uber nerds. And we've completely lost the sensibility to the poor person who has to buy a ticket and rush to the train, or the doctor who has to figure out how to use a terrible interface on the medical equipment. And patterns, which could have opened this up, have become pre-packaged technical solutions. So I'm one of the founders of the pattern discipline. There were 7 of us who went to a mountaintop in Colorado in 1992 and came down with patterns. And then we had these conferences and started building communities. Patterns are written in communities, and they're always part of something called a pattern language. That's funny. There's no pattern language in the Gang of 4 book. So that book came out in, I can't remember, 1995, 1996, and forever destroyed the term. There's not a single pattern in that book. There's no language. There's no sense of what the Japanese call mumyu no shitsu, the quality without a name, the nameless quality, the thing that makes me feel warm and human. And a pattern must do that. So again, it's this technology that takes over. The focus on unit testing, I've talked about. Patterns I've talked about. There's these pre-packaged technical solutions. I invited the creator of modern patterns, Christopher Alexander, to speak at Uppsala in 1996 when I was program chair. And he said, you know, you're a bunch of lackeys. Tell me what to do, Daddy, and I'll do it. Here's your template. Implement this pattern. And I would say that what we've done is we've shirked our responsibility to think. Alexander would say we have shirked our responsibility to feel. This is about feeling and about human sensibilities and making what Richard Gabriel calls habitable software. Would you live in this code? Is this a nice neighborhood? Can you really find your way around? Is it beautiful? Would you live there? Now we want to sell our code and move somewhere else, right? There are some good parts, and they're very little understood. So I mentioned, you know, what part of Model View Controller handles input events? It's not the controller, it's a tool. And people just don't understand this. How many of you draw object diagrams? Not class diagrams, object diagrams. How many of you draw class diagrams? Bunch of nerds. You know, the nerds, you know, object-oriented programming and Agile have become the nerd's revenge. How many people here use use cases? Good for you. What's a user story? How many of you write user stories? It's not about writing. A user story is a promise for a future conversation between an end user and a developer. It's about the conversation. In fact, my wife Gertrude says the original purpose was that they be handwritten on a card. And the reason they were handwritten on a card is so you couldn't read it. And you had to ask the person what was there. It's about people and interactions. I've heard that somewhere. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Oh, better. How many of you keep your user stories in Jira? Losers. All right. The languages do not support multiple classification. And I'll get back to this later. Is that, and this is really a German thing. And I'm from Denmark, and you know, we have our Germanic heritage as well, but Germans think in hierarchies. And you know, I go to a Scrum course for a large German company, or a Scrum talk for a large German company here, and they have hierarchies, and they were describing me the hierarchies. And we have these hierarchies of classes. You know, Germans love their hierarchies. The world is not hierarchical. Why do we like hierarchies? Because you want someone to tell you what to do. You want someone to tell you what to do. It's a command and control system. Now, there are some places, I've done a lot of work in Germany over the past 30 years, where people come to work, they know how to take off their lederhosen, they go to work, they're perfectly good Agile people, and they put their lederhosen back on when they go home again. But there is this thing in the culture that you need to be attentive to that goes very, very deep, and it's very broad. And we see it a lot in the programming languages too. Now, I won't go into depth in this, but the nature of nature is that it's very complex. There are multiple tops. And if you start organizing things into hierarchy, you're limiting your ability to express stuff. Now, not only have objects gone wrong, but I mean, Agile has also lost its way. So people think it means fast. Now remember, Agile came from Scrum, which come from the Takeuchi and Nanaka paper, which come from TPS. Oh, there's this wonderful, how many of you defer decisions to the last responsible moment? So there is this notion of the last responsible moment in TPS, but the word defer doesn't appear anywhere. That was introduced by the XP people. Because it means you don't have to think. So what the lean people say is that the last responsible moment is the moment beyond which your ability to have any control over effect is taken away. So you line up all your decisions at the beginning of a product, the decisions you anticipate making, and you organize them by their dependencies. You don't make the decisions. You just list them and order them. And then it's a program that you execute. And when you get to that point, you make the decision. And of course, you're changing this decision tree all the time. How many of you have one of those lists? Well, in Scrum, it's called the product backlog. Except people order it by priority. No, it's not priority. There's nothing about priority in a product backlog. It's delivery order. And it is ordered in terms of the dependencies using a technique called a design structure matrix. And then I'm going to pull decisions forward. I want to make decisions as early as possible because it's by making decisions that I get information and get feedback. If I just sit there waiting until the last responsible moment comes, the system isn't telling me anything. I want the feedback. What part of feedback do you not understand about Agile? It's about pushing out a little bit. So I mean, the Agile people got this completely wrong. They completely reversed the sense. And now, in the meantime, they're going fast. The Toyota Productions people say, take long deliberation and careful thought for each of these decisions that are on your product backlog. There's nothing about fast in the Agile manifesto. Agile doesn't mean fast, it means people, individuals and interactions. Okay? It's not using, Docker and the current continuous delivery tools. Do you know how much customers hate continuous delivery? Oh, developers love it. I was at a conference. I was talking about this once. It was a continuous delivery conference in Stockholm. And halfway through the talk, I thought, oh, gee, I wonder if my host is angry at me. And I said, I sent you my slides for you to review these to make sure you wouldn't have a problem. And he kind of dropped his head and he said, well, I couldn't read them because I hadn't taken the most recent release of Keynote on my Mac. Continuous delivery? I mean, he didn't take his continuous delivery because people are so annoyed. Social design with CRC cards has been replaced by individual or pairwise testing. Testing cannot do anything to ensure the absence of bugs. There's very little about the user mental model. How many UX people here? Every object-oriented programmer should be a UX person, an HCI person. It's about getting that object on the screen, so I'm closing the loop to the end-user mental model. If you don't understand first principles of mental model elicitation, you have no business doing object-oriented programming. Now, you can, of course, you can use class-oriented programming, which is kind of abstract data types with polymorphism. But abstract data types are not object-oriented programming. It's class-oriented programming. And object-oriented programming is so beautiful and so deeply human and results in such wonderful, powerful, dynamic human systems. And I just don't see it anymore. I certainly don't see it on the web. Oh, gosh. Try to make an airline reservation with with Lufthansa. And that's a humane experience? Processes and tools like Jira and testing over individuals and interactions. It's become about programming instead of about people. And certification over customer collaboration. How many of you are certified Scrum Masters? Whoopee. I mean, I'm a certified Scrum trainer, and I'll tell people the way you get my certification, I tell people I don't certify you. The Scrum Alliance certifies you. The way you get my certification is the first time you're fired for doing your job and standing up for your team. That's how you get my certification. By the way, Ken Schwaber's been fired more than any Scrum Master in the world. Once by Jeff Sutherland. Ask them sometime. They love to tell this story. So Agile has lost its roots. I mean, for example, this whole notion of end-user collaboration. I just was at the DDD conference a couple of months ago. Eric Evans and I have become, I think, very, very good friends. There's a lot of mutual respect. but a big difference in ideology. But he doesn't believe in understanding. I mean, my favorite management quote, I was at AT&T for 20 years, and one management in a fit of passion said, "We don't want to understand this, we want to improve it."
Won't work.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of what DDD is. I mean, you start reading the DDD book and he understands the needs of one client and poof, there's code for one class. And I mean, well, how about the other classes? Might they matter and might they affect how I design this? Well, no, it's another bounded context. And bounded contexts are kind of like microservices. They're completely independent. I was going to rewrite this talk and say that kind of the root cause here, oh, there are no root causes, is that we're trying to divide things up so we have control. This is mine, all mine, and I have control over it, rather than doing systems thinking or team thinking or thinking in terms of networks of interacting objects. We've completely lost this notion from patterns of the quality without a name, that this feels right, that this adds value to society, that this comes out of validated moral imperatives. These are Alexander's words for patterns. A pattern is a moral imperative that is socially agreed. We know it works. It's been proven. How much proof was there behind the favorite idea that you're going to take home from this conference? Or do you just believe? See, we all want to believe in something. And this has become about religion. And a lot of the language arguments and agile arguments are all about religion and I believe. And there's very, very little data. Now, I'll grant you, the data are hard to get. But we're very close to one of the great thinking centers of the world up here at the university with whom I used to work. And I mean, engage these people. Get them to help us get some data here, rather than just running by the seat of our pants. And last, the whole notion of planning and analysis has gone away, which causes more rework. Oh, but we've renamed rework. We call it refactoring. Yes. And wow, oh, he's a good person. He refactored. It's waste. So we have all this focus on product. Now, product focus is kind of okay as long as it doesn't take over. But the whole foundation of TPS and the whole foundation of Scrum is build the right process and you'll build the right product. And this is something where Ken Schwaber in particular is very, very strong. He says Scrum is an educational tool. It's about learning. We'll talk more about this a little later. And again, with Agile, the good parts are understood, are misunderstood. What's the purpose of the daily Scrum? Say a little more.
So you inspect what's going on in your current project, your plan, and then that is...
OK, I like that. I like that. Someone else. I mean, the usual answer I get is, we're going to come together to communicate. Or we're going to report to the Scrum Master. Or, no, the purpose of the daily Scrum is to replan the sprint. You replan the sprint every day. So it's a small sprint planning meeting. And says, and Jeff Sutherland never, if Jeff Sutherland's around, never say reporting. He'll knock you silly. OK? Let's say you're a world-class Scrum team. What percentage of your sprint should you fail? Where I define failure as not delivering all the PBIs you took into the sprint. Your world-class Scrum team, what percentage of your sprints do you fail?
I agree to a 100% failure.
Huh?
I agree to a 100% failure quote. If what you deliver may not be the starting goal, but the good product. It doesn't match the started.
That's not how Scrum works. Sorry. It's not continuous delivery. I define a sprint goal up front, and it's continuous during the sprint. If I'm not going to meet the sprint goal, we abort the sprint. No, that's not Scrum. What percentage? And the answer is 50%. It's just math. How many of you understand a burndown chart? A burndown chart is charted with the average of your velocity using yesterday's weather. A velocity has a variance, usually of plus or minus 20% or so. And the mean of that distribution is what you take as your velocity. So half of your sprints will be above that mean, and half of your sprints are below that mean. If you're not failing 50% of your sprints, you're lying, you're cheating, you're cooking the data. It's just math. This is just how velocity works. What's the best bug tracking strategy in Scrum?
Not to reduce them.
Not to?
Reduce them.
Yeah, we don't track bugs in Scrum. We fix them now. Fixing bugs is always the highest priority thing. If a bug comes up, you drop whatever you're doing, and fixing the bug now is #1 priority. Most of you put them in Jira. Why? No one will ever find them there. How do platform Scrum teams interface with other Scrum teams? There are no platform teams in Scrum. A Scrum team produces a product which is done, 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 ready to go live at the touch of a button. It is not something that goes to another Scrum team. That's a handoff, and handoffs are against every principle of TPS and Lean. Every Scrum team delivers live to the market. There are no platform teams. That's a misunderstanding of Scrum. So I mean, there's all these misunderstandings. So where are we today? You know, instead of individuals and interactions, we have individuals in JUnit. Instead of embracing change, we have deferring to the last responsible moment. Agile fears change. I'm going to defer that change until the last moment that I can deal with it. No, you do not understand. It's about embracing change. Instead of customers and collaboration, we have team-written user stories. The development team is going to write its requirements and then, well, someone's laughing. You know this story very well, don't you? Yes. Quality, working software. Oh, the unit test pass. Who did the presentation on done today? It was really brilliant. Oh, you're up there somewhere. You guys, and when I saw that unit test slide, I thought, I'm going to eat these guys alive at the end of this talk. And then it was brilliant what you guys did. That was a great talk, great talk. Instead of having CRC cards and things like anthropomorphic design, we have individual class design. I mean, where's the people? With CRC cards, I get the team together, and the people are reasoning about the use cases and reasoning about the design. It used to be programming by difference. Now it's refactor and test quality in. It used to be engaging users through end-user mental models. Now let's put a template in here called a design pattern. And used to be called user-centered design, and now it's about TDD and unit testing. Most unit testing is waste. What are the common enemies? Tools over people. Managers can buy technology. And managers, in the end, have a hard time controlling people. So, they buy stuff like Jira that they can use to control people. And more than half of the engagements I've had with clients, Jira is in some way used by management to control and limit the self-organization of the team. Automation. Several talks here on automation. Talk about that in a second. It's not about tools. It's about people. Commercialization, extreme programming came about because the people couldn't make money selling patterns. Scaling, the big dumb companies now want you to go in and paint all of their 1,000 Scrum development members, to be Scrum people. So all of a sudden, scaling has become big commercial business for the training and consulting industry. I went to the Retrospectives Facilitators Gathering in Bath a few years ago, and Norm Kurth, who wrote this wonderful book on retrospectives, said, I mean, there's a lot of people here, they've written books, they're cashing in. They don't get it, they're cashing in. Commoditization. Companies want one process, and therefore it's Scrum, to deliver one piece of software. No, object orientation is personal. It's about personal mental models. We have the problem of simplification. Mike Cohn's test pyramid. It's all based on unit tests. User stories. I've seen some talks about architecture, which is about structuring your software. How many of you structure your requirements? I mean, Gertrude gives this lovely talk where we add something to the user story to say this is dependent on another user story. And then we add a test card. And Mike Cohn has all of this instruction for how you add additional cards behind your user story for dependencies, for test cases, for all of this. He's reinvented the use case. But use cases are bad. No, I mean, we just don't understand. There's this oversimplification that's going on. Solid, another oversimplification. Tough to think about objects. Let's think about classes and use some heuristics that were outdated 20 years ago when C++ had multiple inheritance. And last, ignorance. I mean, doing class-oriented programming instead of OO. The purpose of the daily Scrum, the percentage of sprints the Scrum teams fails. How does this stuff get out there? Where do people get these ideas? Are you professors at the university teaching them? No, where do they come from? Conferences. How about automation? A lot of automation talks at conference. Toyota, which is at the root of the Toyota production system, is in the process of pulling robots off of its assembly line and replacing them with human beings because robots don't learn. And this is about learning. Automated testing, no. Someone, was it you guys again, the exploratory testing that was in your talk? The purpose of running a test is to find out what test you run next, with the exception of regressions. Automate your regression tests, that's fine. But other than that, I mean, most of your testing should be exploratory testing, not automated testing. The purpose isn't to make the green bar come up. So how do we restore focus here? Some ideas. In terms of being about people, one of the very exciting things I've seen emerge recently is something called mob programming. How many of you have tried mob programming or you know about mob programming? So it's kind of like pair programming, except it's the entire team. You have one person at the keyboard. They may not think, they may not talk. They only type. You have a facilitator, and then the rest of the code, the rest of the team writes the code and tells the typist what to type. And then you switch roles after a few minutes. Swap people around. This is, I think, a great way of getting the individuals and interactions back into play. Just CRC cards, bringing those back. Organizational learning, beyond process to structure. And I'll talk about this in a second. Just good UX knowledge. Go back to school. Get some knowledge on just basic stuff. Gom's law, mental models. You know, what it means to be able to elicit the kind of ways that our users are thinking about things so our software can meet them halfway. This is what object-oriented programming is all about. And with respect to both the organizational learning and things like interfacing with end users, the real power here is in process. And a balance of process thinking and product thinking together. Now, there's some other lighthouses kind of on the technology scale that I think are going to help on a very low level. And I'd encourage you to start looking into these. Things like JavaScript. It's a real object-oriented programming language. And really understanding real pattern languages. We have a couple of communities now that are developing real pattern languages. One is a pattern language of Scrum. It's public. It's on the web. You can find it. But here's where a lot of the power is for capitalizing on the kind of ideas that Takeuchi and Nonaka had of bringing forward the knowledge of the organization into the current day. And maybe someday, end-user programmability. This, again, was Kay's original vision. It wasn't that a programmer wrote this stuff for the child. The child wrote the stuff in a very small language, small talk. It was designed for children, for them to be able to write their own code, blindingly simple.
And the bank test code. The banks. The most companies that use Scrum were the banks.
Oh, that use small talk in the early days. And that was largely a marketing issue, which really blew up. I can tell you a nice story over beer sometime about Lens and small talk and Park Place Systems. I was brought in to clean up that mess. There's something else which I've been following for years, and there's some wonderful British literature by, that talks about design as a field. And recently this has gotten a name. It's called the design movement. Christopher Alexander, the patterns guy, was also part of this. But we also have books like this wonderful book edited by a German woman called Software Development as Reality Construction. What's her name? I can't remember, standing here on my feet. But there's a lot of literature that no programmers just have ever read. That's instead of having a method or a tool that's going to get me to the end, I start with an understanding of the problem and a vision of the solution, and then they have some techniques for getting there that are very non-Cartesian. In terms of, someone gave up, had to talk about their retrospective. A good retrospective to work on your process is a 3-day exercise. It takes 1 day to get drunk. Another day to kind of dig into the problems, and then another day to come back into the workplace. And there's some wonderful literature on organizational learning. A lot of it comes out of Royal Dutch Shell. You see some of this also in Peter Senge's work that talks about organizational learning. At the surface, it's process. This is the ISO 9000 kind of stuff. What does process come from? Why do you have code inspections? Well, because I have coders, and I have people who are not coders, who are inspectors. It comes from the organizational structure. Structure generates process. If you change process without changing the structure wins. So the real payoff is in process. This is called double loop learning. It takes knowledge and understanding. It's about changing the structure. So in a lot of the talks here about retrospective, I'm hearing a lot of stuff's up here in single loop. And in a year, they're going to be right back where they are now, because the double loop stuff isn't happening. And the real stuff is in triple loop. Identity. Who are we? What should we be building? I knew a company that used to make rubber boots and tires, and then they started making cell phones. Maybe they ought to go back to tires and boots. This was Nokia. Facebook was originally kind of a pickup place for college guys to find pictures of women, and evolved into the social network. So a real retrospective is going to go deeper than this. The problem isn't a better definition of done and a better definition of shippable. It's to recognize that having both a separate definition of done and a definition of shippable creates a handoff and is going to create rework and create waste. Now, why wouldn't I bring that up on my retrospective? Oh, because we can't get the product owner to buy into this. You know what? I've never met the product owner. Do you know how hard it is to get hold of him? Yeah, he's a person. And I can deal with the technical stuff in my retrospective. This is about courage. Not just tell me what to do, Daddy. So this is really making an investment. in the end, it comes down to failure to dream. We all want to be risk averse, and that tempers our dreams. It throws waters on our dreams. We tend to work within areas we can control, and networks of objects and teams of individuals take us beyond the scope of our control. Dream to do great things. Alan Kay was dreaming to do great things with educating children. Second to the last slide. Where's this quote from? Anyone know this quote? The strategy for bootstrapping the poor out of poverty has been a model for freeing hundreds of thousands of software developers from developer abuse caused by poor management practices. Who wrote this? This is the Scrum Handbook by Jeff Sutherland. Jeff's on a mission. Get me over beer sometime, I'll tell you what the real mission is. This isn't about daily stand-ups. This isn't about productivity. This is about something much more deeply human. And you look at the people behind us, like the Alan Kays and the Jeff Sutherlands, and they understand this. That's why I'm here. What can you do? After this conference, for each talk, ask, was there compelling evidence for the claims that this is better than anything else, or that it even works? At this conference, for each talk, ask, how does this improve the quality of life, and for how many people? And try to take home 5 ideas that will help your team increase the human value of your product or service. Not just the bug count, not just meeting the KPIs. I mean, in terms of value, I'll end with a story where there was a woman in Jeff's team who once wanted to get a 10 on merit review that year. And Jeff didn't believe in giving numbers, but he said, all right, to give a 10, we need to do all these things. And she got a 10. By the way, getting a 10, one of the criteria was you end up on the front page of Business Week. Pretty high bar. So why doesn't he believe in these numbers? And Jeff says, because even if the individual fails, they learn something and the team succeeds. So if the individual fails and the team succeeds, the individual doesn't matter. If the team fails and the product succeeds, the team doesn't matter. If the product doesn't succeed and the company does succeed, the product doesn't matter. And if the company fails and the nation succeeds, the company doesn't matter. What matters to you? I'll leave you with this thought. I hope some good thoughts can come into your head from the things you've learned here. It's been great being here. Thanks for the opportunity to come and address you.